Okay, welcome everybody to today's lecture. I think you're going to find this very interesting precisely because we're going to be dealing with topics that you can relate to your own experience. We're going to be talking about work and the worker, and we're going to be asking the question, are we doing it all wrong? So let's get started. Going to be asking, the topic is decommodifying labor. We're going to be talking about the priority of labor. We're going to be talking about ownership and work. We're going to be talking about self-management. Is that possible? Then we'll find out what even the monkey. Let's start with the priority of labor. This is certainly a principle that we've talked about a lot in the social encyclicals. Does it have any practical application in the real world as a real principle of management? Now, when we get to the knowledge worker, these issues become more and more evident. But in truth, all workers are knowledge workers. I mean, you cannot separate the two. Just that in higher areas like finance or computer science, this knowledge becomes more, the importance of this knowledge becomes more and more to the fore. But it's equally true of the shop floor worker, and always was. The problem is that we are using a very poor anthropology. We really have to understand what motivates people. So let's take a look at this.
Our motivations are unbelievably interesting. I mean, I've been working on this for a few years, and I just find the topic still so amazingly engaging and interesting. So I want to tell you about that. The science is really surprising. The science is a little bit freaky, okay? We are not as endlessly manipulable and as predictable as you would think. There's a whole set of unbelievably interesting studies. I want to give you two that call into question this idea that if you reward something, you get more of the behavior you want. If you punish something, you get less of it. So let's go from London to the mean streets of Cambridge, Massachusetts, in the northeastern part of the United States. And let's talk about a study done at MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Here's what they did. They took a whole group of students, and they gave them a set of challenges. Things like memorizing strings of digits, solving word puzzles, other kinds of spatial puzzles, even physical tasks like throwing a ball through a hoop. Okay, they gave them these challenges, and they said to incentivize their performance, they gave them 3 levels of rewards. Okay, so if you did pretty well, you got a small monetary reward. If you did medium well, you got a medium monetary reward. And if you did really well, if you were one of the top performers, you got a large cash prize. Okay, we've seen this movie before. This is essentially a typical motivation scheme within organizations, right? We reward the very top performers. We ignore the low performers and the other folks kind of in the middle. Okay, you get a little bit. So what happens? They do the test. They have these incentives. Here's what they found out. 1, as long as the task involved only mechanical skill, bonuses worked as they would be expected. The higher the pay, the better their performance. Okay, that makes sense. But here's what happens. But once the task called for even rudimentary cognitive skill, a larger reward led to poorer performance. Now, this is strange, right? A larger reward led to poorer performance? How can that possibly be? Now, what's interesting about this is that these folks here who did this are all economists, 2 at MIT, 1 at the University of Chicago, 1 at Carnegie Mellon, okay, the top tier of the economics profession. And they're reaching this conclusion that seems contrary to what a lot of us learned in economics, which is that the higher the reward, the better their performance. And they're saying that once you get above rudimentary cognitive skill, it's the other way around. Which seems like this kind of, the idea that these rewards don't work that way seems vaguely left-wing and socialist, doesn't it? It's kind of this kind of weird socialist conspiracy. For those of you who have those conspiracy theories, I want to point out the notoriously left-wing socialist group that financed the research, the Federal Reserve Bank. So this is the mainstream of the mainstream coming to a conclusion that's quite surprising, seems to defy the laws of behavioral physics. So this is strange, a strange finding. So what do? They say, this is freaky. Let's go test it somewhere else. Maybe that $50 or $60 prize isn't sufficiently motivating for an MIT student, right? So let's go to a place where $50 is actually more significant relatively, right? So let's take the experiment. We're going to go to Madurai, India, rural India, where $50, $60, whatever the number was, is actually a significant sum of money. So they replicated the experiment in India roughly as follows. Small rewards, the equivalent of 2 weeks' salary. Small performance, low performance, 2 weeks' salary. Medium performance, about a month's salary. High performance, about 2 months' salary. Okay, so those are real good incentives. Okay, so you're going to get a different result here. Well, what happened, though, was that the people offered the medium reward did no better than the people offered the small reward. But this time around, the people offered the top reward. They did worst of all. Higher incentives led to worse performance. What's interesting about this is that it actually isn't all that anomalous. This has been replicated over and over and over again by psychologists, by some extent by sociologists, and by economists, over and over and over again. For simple, straightforward tasks, those kinds of incentives, if you do this, then you get that, they're great. For tasks that are algorithmic, set of rules where you have to just follow along and get a right answer, if-then rewards, carrots and sticks, outstanding. But when the task gets more complicated, when it requires some conceptual creative thinking, those kinds of motivators demonstrably don't work. In fact, money is a motivator at work, but in a slightly strange way. If you don't pay people enough, they won't be motivated. What's curious about, there's another paradox here, which is that the best use of money as a motivator is to pay people enough to take the issue of money off the table. Pay people enough so that they're not thinking about money and they're thinking about the work. Now, once you do that, it turns out there are 3 factors that the science shows lead to better performance, not to mention personal satisfaction. Autonomy, mastery, and purpose. Autonomy is our desire to be self-directed, to direct our own lives. Now, in many ways, traditional notions of management run afoul of that. Management is great if you want compliance, but if you want engagement, which is what we want in the workforce today as people are doing more complicated, sophisticated things, self-direction is better. Let me give you some examples of this, of almost radical forms of self-direction in the workplace that lead to good results. Let's start with this company right here, Atlassian, an Australian company. It's a software company, and they do something really cool. Once a quarter on a Thursday afternoon, they say to their developers, for the next 24 hours, you can work on anything you want. You can work on it the way you want. You can work on it with whomever you want. All we ask is that you show the results to the company at the end of those 24 hours in this fun kind of meeting, not a star chamber session, but this fun meeting with beer and cake and fun and other things like that. It turns out that that one day of pure, undiluted autonomy has led to a whole array of fixes for existing software, a whole array of ideas for new products that otherwise had never emerged. One day. Now, this is not an if-then incentive. This is not the sort of thing that I would have done 3 years ago before I knew this research. I would have said, you want people to be creative and innovative? Give them a freaking innovation bonus. If you do something cool, I'll give you $2,500. They're not doing this at all. They're essentially saying, you probably want to do something interesting. Let me just get out of your way. One day of autonomy produces things that had never emerged. Okay, let's talk about mastery. Mastery is our urge to get better at stuff. We like to get better at stuff. This is why people play musical instruments on the weekend. You got all these people who are acting in ways that seem irrational economically. They play musical instruments on weekends. Why? It's not going to get them a mate. It's not going to make them any money. Why are they doing it? Because it's fun, because you get better at it, and that's satisfying. Go back in time a little bit. I imagine this if I went to my first economics professor, a woman named Mary Alice Schulman. And I went to her in 1983 and said, Professor Schulman, can I talk to you after class for a moment? Yeah. I got this inkling. I got this idea for a business model. I just want to run it past you. Here's how it would work. You get a bunch of people around the world who are doing highly skilled work, but they're willing to do it for free and volunteer their time, 20, sometimes 30 hours a week. Okay, she's looking at you somewhat skeptically there. Oh, but I'm not done. And then what they create, they give it away rather than sell it. It's going to be huge. I mean, she truly would have thought I was insane. Okay, it seemed to fly in the face of so many things. But what do? You have Linux powering 1 out of 4 corporate servers in Fortune 500 companies, Apache powering more than the majority of web servers, Wikipedia. What's going on? Why are people doing this? Why are these people, many of whom are technically sophisticated, highly skilled people who have jobs? Okay, they have jobs. They're working at jobs for pay, doing sophisticated technological work, and yet during their limited discretionary time, they do equally, if not more, technically sophisticated work, not for their employer, but for someone else for free. That's a strange economic behavior. Economists who look into it, why are they doing this? It's overwhelmingly clear. Challenge and mastery, along with making a contribution. That's it. What you see more and more is a rise of what you might call the purpose motive, is that more and more organizations want to have some kind of transcendent purpose, partly because it makes coming to work better, partly because that's the way to get better talent. And what we're seeing now is, in some ways, when the profit motive becomes unmoored from the purpose motive, bad things happen. Bad things ethically sometimes, but also bad things just like not good stuff, like crappy products, like lame services, like uninspiring places to work. That when the profit motive is paramount, or when it becomes completely unhitched from the purpose motive, it's just, people don't do great things. More and more organizations are realizing this and sort of disturbing the categories between what's profit and what's purpose. And I think that actually heralds something interesting. And I think that the organizations that are flourishing, whether they're profit, for profit, or somewhere in between, are animated by this purpose model. Let me give you a couple of examples. Here's the founder of Skype. He says, our goal is to be disruptive, but in the cause of making the world a better place. Pretty good purpose. Here's Steve Jobs. I want to put a ding in the universe. All right? That's the kind of thing that might get you up in the morning and racing to go to work. So I think that, that we are purpose maximizers, not only profit maximizers. I think the science shows that we care about mastery very, very deeply. And the science shows that we want to be self-directed. And I think that the big takeaway here is that if we start treating people like people and not assuming that they're simply horses, slower, smaller, better-smelling horses, if we get past this kind of ideology of carrots and sticks and look at the science, I think we can actually build organizations and work lives that make us better off, but I also think they have the promise to make our world just a little bit better.
Okay. I want to point out just a couple of things here. One, notice how that meshes with the idea of the hierarchy of needs that we talked about before, where mastery and self-direction is so important. Also, I want to point out that this film is made with that free software. It's made with a program called OBS, a software editor. Software editors can cost you an awful lot, but this one is absolutely free. It's all done on donated time. All right, let's talk about ownership and work. Let's think about ownership as part of the wage. And when you do that, I think it just obviates the question of the just wage. And my question has always been, are we starting at the wrong place? If we start at the just wage, we're starting, I think, at the end result. If we talk about ownership, the wage sort of solves itself. And what it also does, and this is the most important thing for management, it internalizes the motivations of the firm. Also, it's part of education. Once you have responsibility for the firm, then you have to learn the books, you have to learn about management, you have to learn about self-management. These are all important things. Now, the great legal vehicle for doing that in this country is called the ESOP, the Employee Stock Ownership Plans. where profits of the company are used to buy out the company in behalf of the employees. Let's look at one of these firms called Springfield Remanufacturing.
Next, as the Senate debates whether some banks and other financial institutions are too big to fail, NewsHour economics correspondent Paul Solman takes a second look at a company that has some interesting lessons about being small enough to succeed. It's part of his ongoing reporting on making sense of financial news.
When we first visited SRC, the Springfield Remanufacturing Corporation, back in 1990, it was thriving, refurbishing old truck engines.
We tear them down and then we rebuild them.
SRC was an unlikely Rust Belt success story. Given that Japan was supposedly #1 in those days, the U.S. dead in the water when it came to manufacturing. The company in Springfield, Missouri, attributed its success to what it called the great game of business. Everyone was on the same team, was taught to read the financials and thus how to keep score.
They want us to know exactly what we're putting out every month.
Finally, the company was owned lock, stock, and crankshaft by its workers, so everyone had a stake in the game's outcome. CEO Jack Stack, who founded SRC.
I feel motivated for one reason. They got an income statement. They all know it. That's their motivation. It's a unifying factor. It's their report card.
So 20 years later, and with China now ascendant, renewing concerns that America may again be consigned to the dust heap of manufacturing history, we wanted to know, how's the company doing? Today's SRC, it turns out, is SRC Holdings, with investments in almost 60 related companies, employing some 1,200 people. Many still remanufacturing cars, tractors, boats, but there's also a home furnishings firm, a warehousing operation, a business that teaches folks how to do business, the SRC way. In an era of too big to fail, SRC's motto would seem to be small enough to succeed.
Most of us came from very, very large factories. Okay?
Jack Stack is still CEO.
It's very, very hard to get passion in the organization over 250, over 400 people. You lose the touch that you really need in terms of building the teamwork that you want.
So every time SRC got near that size, another division was hived off as its own firm, most in Springfield, some beyond. From SRC came SRC Electrical. It makes starters and alternators. A new offshoot from it will soon make electronics. Now, this small is beautiful strategy may not be for everyone, but Stack says it preserves solidarity, flexibility, entrepreneurship, and it has created more opportunities for advancement at SRC.
And once we taught people business and how to understand it and how to be able to run a business, we really prepped them, and so we saw the opportunity of being able to move them into their own businesses, to make room for other people to be able to come up to the organization, because it was not only about jobs, it was about opportunities.
Stack's son Tim runs SRC Logistics.
There's a lot of opportunity that we have under this 400,000 square foot building. It's just, where do we start?
This is the so-called Skunk Works, an incubator for new SRC businesses. It collects old parts and devises new uses for them. SRC hopes to turn ideas ginned up here into new companies.
What's that, a truck engine?
Yeah, it can be used in trucks. They could put in power units to power houses. They can be put in airboats. We've seen wood chippers.
Of course, not every recycling idea pans out. Auto floor mats, for example.
Well, what exactly were you thinking when you bought thousands of these, it looks like?
We were thinking we could make some pretty good money on it. Otherwise, we wouldn't have done it. But in reality, they turned out to still be here. But we've been talking to companies about chopping these up into little pieces and using them for playgrounds or turf, where people put fields, artificial turf.
SRC has come to believe that only by keeping its units small and managers empowered can it foster this sort of innovation, which actually saved some of its key companies during the recent crisis in its key industry, automotive.
Automotive got murdered, and our client was General Motors. So we have 200 and some people there that are just virtually out of work.
But this spinoff was small enough to remanufacture itself.
This is our 5.7 liter General Motors engine that we converted for natural gas application.
Natural gas engines became backup electricity units for irrigation, oil drilling. The old engines found new customers, like the U.S. Postal Service. Result, no layoffs during the crisis, and now workers are doing 50-hour weeks, the company hiring again, by following the familiar formula. Learn the financials, share the proceeds, stay small. And that's what it teaches to others like Juliet Mee, who owns this massage training center in Springfield.
I had no idea about how important the numbers were in my business.
Once a math-phobic masseuse, the newly confident Mee has since stabilized the school, even spun off companies to clean linens, hers and others, manage benefits for her staff and those at other small firms.
We'll start with some simple compressions on your back.
The school took a pounding during the downturn, but the fact that the staff was aware of the failing financials, she says, made survival possible.
At the end of last year, our employees knew that some bills had to be paid that the cash was not there for, and they loaned me personally enough money so that I could put that money into the company and pay those bills.
So they gave you this bridge loan when they themselves must have been under financial stress because they want to keep the company going, keep their jobs going, and they trust you.
Because they knew the need was real and they knew that the cash was not going to come in from any other source.
Not easy for folks who only make about $30,000 a year. With business now in better shape, the topic of a recent staff huddle, whether to take a bonus for the first time in 18 months.
Our income needs to be at $500,000.
Turns out they missed that target by $500. So it went to a staff vote.
No bonus. No bonus. No bonus.
They voted 14-6 against giving themselves bonuses.
We're in this thing together, and my employees have kicked it in because they know I'm telling them the truth.
Yeah, I love that.
Megan Chambers was a reluctant open book convert. In 2004, she opened the Springfield clothing boutique Stax. Although the store had great PR and soaring sales, 3 years after opening, she ran out of cash.
All my money was tied in my inventory. It was a difficult time. I was not sleeping at night. I was not eating. This was going to go down, and it was such a good thing. And why was it going to go down? I didn't understand it.
My daughter has style. Okay, if you went to her store, she's got incredible style, but she hates numbers.
Before she married, Megan Chambers was Megan Stack, the only one of Jack's children not playing the game of open book management. The family's dirty little secret, since her parents had bankrolled the store.
I bleed open book management. Okay, I believe that you have to have style, but you have to have that financial acumen in order to be able to put the two together.
Finally, I went into a meeting with him, like tears, just like, all right, I'm ready. Like, what do I have to do?
The father would continue to support the store with a $50,000 loan if the daughter opened up her books.
And then she had to sign a commitment with her investor that she would teach everybody financials, and her investor would then audit whether or not everybody understood the numbers.
Obviously, with the variance of our margin and the expenses being a little bit higher than expected,
the Stax staff started talking stats at their monthly meetings. Results? A focus on higher margins and turning inventory faster.
We were successful at it as soon as those books were opened. I mean, it was a growth from that moment, from that month I implemented it, we started to grow.
Just as our interview was wrapping up, an unexpected visitor.
You are not here to terrorize your daughter by making her even more self-conscious.
She does not listen to me.
It is very true in that I definitely could market it and I could sell it and I could do everything else, but when it came to running it in the numbers, it was something I did shy away from.
Not anymore. Now the proprietor envisions a Stax spin-off or two, and maybe even someday passing SRC's open book management on to the next generation, her new baby daughter, who, with the right help, is also arguably small enough to succeed.
Okay. a couple of things occur to me here. One, how this really embodies the idea of solidarity. So there's a unifying force. The books become a unifying force. The profit sharing becomes a unifying force, reinforcing solidarity in the firm. Another thing that occurs to me, that incident where the massage company, they missed their target by 1/1000th of a percent, $500 out of $500 out of $500,000. Now, if you were in a firm that denied you a bonus for missing it by 1/1000th of a percent, would there be some bitterness against management? But here, the employees made the decision themselves. I think that's remarkable. Finally, would you like to work for a company like this? Okay. Okay. Whoop.
Next, as a
wrong direction. Let's talk about self-management. I mean, how important is management? Can the employees manage themselves? Well, that was the idea of Ricardo Semler and Semco. Ricardo Semler inherited a firm from his father, but he didn't want to run it. So instead, he turned the management over to the employees using techniques of open book management and profit sharing, and with an emphasis on group self-management, and with a whole different idea of management structure. So if you think about a typical firm today, well, you're going to see basically a pyramid with bosses at the top and layers and layers and layers of workers. Semco uses a different model. They use the pyramid and the circle. So instead of instead of the pyramid, they use the circle. So there are 3 concentric circles. At the center is what we would call top management. Then there's a second layer, intermediate management, and then everybody at the outside. Now, this is sometimes called a flat organization, but it's not quite accurate in this case. Here's the point. In most large companies, you will never ever see somebody from the top. Okay? In fact, you will never even see someone who has connections to someone at the top. But in Semco, every top manager has connections with someone who's connected to the lowest level, and or the outer circle. And someone in the outer circle has direct connections with someone who's connected to the inner circle. So it's a completely different idea of management. So let's take a look at it.
Abre a cortina do passado, tira a mãe preta do cerrado.
Sunny Brazil is a magnet for tourists. Each year, thousands flock here looking for sun, sand, and the good life. But I've come looking for Brazil's other gift to the world. Welcome to Semco. It mightn't look like it, but this is one of the world's most radical workplaces. And the difference begins at reception. In fact, Semco has 2 receptionists. Nothing unusual about that, except that the company itself doesn't know which one will be there to greet you.
But we are not sure which one will be there in the morning or in the afternoon, because they talk to each other and they set their own schedule.
Almost every one of Semco's 3,000 employees sets their own schedule.
Edwin is the CEO of this business unit.
It seems the CEO doesn't have an office and is leaving early. is not the only one.
There's no reason why they shouldn't.
IT worker Zhao Neto gives himself every Monday off. He didn't ask for permission.
Basically,
He knows it would
three
be very
reasons
hard
why
for his
they
supervisor
also
to check
select
up
the
on him.
officer. We can do it.
Like these employees, he keeps changing workstations.
The idea is that you shouldn't use the same position. Should not use 2 days in a row.
It's a rule designed to make employees hard to track.
We can even work here. Because if you have one area where you have all the fixed desks, the supervisor may be there and see 8 o'clock was not here.
Right.
But he's not supposed to do that. Right? So the company is providing means to avoid that.
We don't want to know what time people came, how many hours they worked. We want to negotiate and contract with them for much more important things that have to do with our survival, which is what are they going to do this month? And what do we get from them out of this salary or this value that we're paying? And what do they get out of us in terms of gratification for their life? The rest to us is secondary.
The Semco philosophy is that a lot of what managers do shouldn't be done.
Oh, absolutely. I would say that maybe 30% of people's time is spent trying to understand why people make more than they do, how come people came late, why weren't you at the meeting, can you do this by Wednesday at 6 o'clock? And it's all very silly, and there's an enormous waste, and of course at a certain point in time people just are dumbed down and they say, you know, this is just too much work. What do you want me to do? I'll just do my 9 to 5 thing. I'll learn how to survive in this environment.
That's not what happens here. It seems that knocking off early isn't a problem if the work's been done. Normally this machine shop turns out parts for merchant ships, but the workers here supervise themselves. They'd gone home for the afternoon when we turned up.
Well, they are grown up. They are producing what is required.
So when you open up that door, you don't necessarily know whether the factory is going to be working or not.
Not necessarily.
Then again, some of the workers might be back on Sunday if they need to be. These look like hammocks.
Yes, they are.
They've installed hammocks so they can rest and think in comfort. Do you see people resting in these in the middle of the day?
Nothing wrong.
Nossa, eu não conheço uma expressão para isso.
Here's another radical idea. Each business unit within Semco gets to pick its own furniture. This workplace has deliberately chosen cheap chairs.
Why? Because they want to spend the money in somewhere else.
Semco's workers are frugal when it comes to spending their business unit's money. They each get a share of its profits. And then there's this, a cartoon guide to reading the company's accounts, produced by the union and the company. Staff have access to all the company's financial data, and Semco wants to make sure that its workers understand what they're reading. Ricardo Semler believes that unions still have a role to play in his company, though, as in many places, they're in decline.
Unions have less of a role because we deal more openly with all of these issues anyway. But we ourselves are looking for ways to substitute the decline of unions for internal processes where people elect, every 10 people elect somebody who is a keeper of the cultural values and who has job stability, people who can look at every firing and hiring and be able to take an independent position about it in the name of the employees.
With workers virtually running the business, you could be forgiven for thinking that this cutting-edge capitalism has a distinctly socialist tinge.
And if you say, you know, is this Trotskyist or Marxist, is this new socialism, is this European socialism? I don't think so, because the basic issues of the free market are there, which is tell us how much time you want to work, tell us how much you need to make, tell us what you need in exchange, how you gratify yourself by doing something like this. And this does away with the political ideology issues of what ism does this fall under, because it's just respecting anthropological issues instead of political ideas.
Every 6 months, every SEMCO worker is invited to select his or her salary. He or she is given information about what workers in similar jobs are getting elsewhere.
Average, the minimum, maximum, the sizes of the companies.
And imagine your boss telling you you should be asking for more.
We have cases where they say, no, think again. We don't think this is fair.
We want to pay you more.
Yeah, we want to pay you more.
But don't ask for too much. You might be fired by your colleagues. The entire unit, not just the bosses, decides who to hire and fire. And with workers sharing profits, no one wants to work with a shirker.
Let's suppose you ask me why you're not working. If you're not doing your job, this is going to affect our profit sharing. So you're taking money out of my pocket if you're not doing what you're supposed to do.
You get the feeling that it's in some ways hard to work at this most successful of Brazilian conglomerates. There's freedom, but with it plenty of pressure to perform.
There is peer pressure for bad behavior. If you're here just to collect things for yourself, to live on some other from other people's efforts, you're not wanted here.
Para a nossa passejata de 15 minutos.
It's a philosophy that's worked well for Ricardo Semler. These days, he's a public speaker and author. He organised this seminar to bring together 50 of Brazil's best minds to discuss the future of the nation. His company turns over $160 million a year, up from $4 million when he took over what was a struggling ship part supplier 25 years ago. He wasn't in the day we visited. He hardly ever is.
He doesn't like the day-to-day operations. He doesn't like to be checking purchase orders or signing checks, things. He's bothered. He gets bothered with this small things.
So he's turning his attention to something grander, shaping Brazil's next generation. This is education without compulsion.
Do you know how to play memory games?
The man who believes in managing without managers wants to teach without teachers. His Lumiar Primary School in Sao Paulo uses tutors and masters instead. The masters are architects, astronomers, painters, musicians. Real experts chosen by the students themselves to come in for weeks at a time. It sort of helps if they're not teachers. The thinking is that children want to learn and that ordinary schools stop them.
There's a lot wrong with traditional education. The real question is why do we think we have anything to add to that field? And what we find is that the adults that come to us after being uniformized and homogenized over the years and calcified in the school system, they come to us ready to follow orders, to understand what it is we want them to do. And we've realized that the only way to change this, and it's very expensive and difficult and long to change it at the company, the only way to really change this is to start working with the moment in which society does all this harm to them, which is really at 2.
But like SEMCO, that doesn't mean a school without rules. It has rules decided by the students themselves.
One of the most important rules of the school was forbidden to fight, bite, kick, pinch. This is very interesting because we sit down with the school meeting and say, come on, let's think about can we fight and bite and kick everybody? We can say yes, and children can say yes, but in the same moment, everyone says no. So there's idea of a school being run by kids don't mean crazy place. They know what's reasonable or not.
3 hours down the road, the 46-year-old Semler is preparing to enjoy some of the spoils from his radical initiatives. He's building a multi-million-dollar family weekender. But even here, in the Mantiqueira Mountains, he's applying his philosophy to a new venture. Across this valley is a 20-room luxury ecotourism resort, a property development in the most traditional sense, except that the locals aren't being displaced. They're being given jobs, shares, and a say in how it develops. How many of these people working here would be locals?
100.
Marcos Aurelio is a local who now finds himself the project's head gardener. It's a responsibility he never envisioned coming his way.
Eu que moro aqui desde criança, né, nunca ouvi falar de uma coisa, um empreendimento a esse porte, vindo para cá.
I think people are a bit perplexed at the whole thing. And basically, in the beginning, they thought this must be some ruse to finally buy our houses or to buy our land or to get us out. And economic expulsion is something that we have to fight, actually, because it doesn't even take us buying it. It's other people who come around and say, oh, there's this great resort here. Let me buy this guy's house. And so we're giving them long-term financing and other ways to make sure that they stay put.
It seems like nirvana, but it hasn't been easy for the locals, nor has it been easy for the students in Ricardo Semler's school or the workers in his firm.
They're under a tremendous amount of responsibility because they're on their own, meaning if the sales don't happen, the business unit ceases to exist. If the student doesn't learn anything, they really don't have a capacity to go out into the world. If the hotel people are not able to give sustained service at a quality level, they're not going to have customers and guests. So in this format, they're obliged to actually make things happen. And that responsibility is many times more unforgiving than it sounds.
Okay. A couple of observations here. I want to relay one story about the company. You saw, of course, in the factories, I mean, in the office settings, of course, everybody is self-managed. All right. So, but how about the factory? Okay. It turns out that in the factory, Semler insisted that the factory workers have this same self-organization that the office workers did. And his managers told him, that's impossible. You cannot run a factory like that. But he insisted. So they got together a management team. And this management team was going to meet once a day for the first month of this experiment because they were all sure that it was going to fail. And then if the experiment continued after a month, the management committee would meet once a week, and nobody expected it to last that long. As it turned out, the management committee never met at all, because while the managers were arguing over whether this was a possibility, well, Jorge in the factory turns to Maria and says, look, I can't come in at 8 o'clock because I have to take the kids to school. And Maria says, that's fine. I can come in early, but I have to leave early because I have to pick up the kids from school. The factory workers, talking among themselves, solved all the problems that the management expected would happen. And so they didn't need the management committee at all. Another thing I would like to point out is this notion of peer pressure versus management diktat. So think about this. Everybody there depends on the profit sharing. Now, if a manager comes to you and says, look, if you don't straighten up, I'm going to fire you. Well, that's one reaction. But if your fellow employees come to you and say, hey, look, Jack, you got to do better. What is going to be more effective in motivating? Is it peer pressure or management pressure? Okay. Well, finally, let's ask what even the monkey knows. And the question here is justice something genetic? Well, let's ask the monkey.
So a final experiment that I want to mention to you is our fairness study. And so this became a very famous study, and there's now many more, because after we did this about 10 years ago, it became very well known. And we did that originally with capuchin monkeys, and I'm going to show you the first experiment that we did. It has now been done with dogs, and with birds, and with chimpanzees, but with Sarah Brosnan we started out with capuchin monkeys. So what we did is we put two capuchin monkeys side by side. Again, these animals, they live in a group. They know each other. We take them out of the group, put them in a test chamber. And there's a very simple task that they need to do. And if you give both of them cucumber for the task, the two monkeys side by side, they're perfectly willing to do this 25 times in a row. So cucumber, even though it's really only water in my opinion, but cucumber is perfectly fine for them. Now, if you give the partner grapes, the food preferences of my capuchin monkeys correspond exactly with the prices in the supermarket. And so if you give them grapes, it's a far better food, then you create inequity between them. So that's the experiment we did. Recently, we videotaped it with new monkeys who had never done the task, thinking that maybe they would have a stronger reaction, and that turned out to be right. The one on the left is the monkey who gets cucumber. The one on the right is the one who gets grapes. The one who gets cucumber, note that the first piece of cucumber is perfectly fine. The first piece she eats. Then she sees the other one getting grape, and you will see what happens. So she gives a rock to us, that's the task. And we give her a piece of cucumber, and she eats it. The other one needs to give a rock to us. And that's what she does. And she gets a grape. And she eats it. The other one sees that. She gives a rock to us now, gets again cucumber. She tests a rock now against the wall. She needs to give it to us. And she gets cucumber again. So this is basically the Wall Street protest that you see here.
Okay. So, have you ever worked at a firm where you got the cucumber and somebody else got the grape? All right. Well, let's close this out. I want to think about rethinking management, and I want to relate it. I want you to relate it to the ideas from Catholic social teaching that we've been studying throughout this course. Let's think about motivations. How do we get the workers to internalize the firm's goals? Think about the idea of subsidiarity. Do workers exist to serve the management, or do we have higher levels of management there to serve the workers? And think about your own experience. How does all of this relate to your own experience? Surely, you've seen these issues even in your work experience so far. All right, I look forward to discussing this in our study groups and reading about it on the discussion board. I'll see you next week.